Thank you so much, Jules and the team. Good morning, everyone. My name is Craig. It's such a joy to see you all. I'm glad you guys are here. Sizwe and the guys from Solid Ground, they joined us for worship. They're about to head out, but as he's heading out, Sizwe turned 21 yesterday. Hey. So we love Sizwe. Congratulations, young man. Guys, go and enjoy Solid Ground. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's such a joy with all the life that's been happening in our church and everything to look forward to. Jules, I remember you sharing that story with me about the kids, and over here it was your kids who changed the holiday date, right? It wasn't as much as she's changed the date. The kids were so disappointed, and so that change has been made, and my kids as well. Just talk about it all the time. It's just exciting, all that's happening in and through the life of Riverside, and it's a joy to be here. So you know when you have conversations with people and you kind of talk about like, you know you're old when? You know, I crossed a bit of a milestone recently with you know you're old when. And this is a very unpleasant confession that I have acquired a pill organizer. Right? Like, when did that happen? It's just like this thing where, like, I remember, I was 20 a little while ago when, you know, sleep didn't matter. I ate what I wanted and didn't really care so much about health. And, you know, things then started to change. You know, when I met Inez, we fell in love. We ended up getting married. And now, you know, there's another person in your life that you start to care about and get responsible for. And so we start to ask questions around medical aid and medical cover. And our thinking starts to change around our health. I remember one day when she was heavily pregnant with Aaron, I got a phone call from her school where she was teaching at. Man, the anxiety spiked because I was told that she had a fall and she needed to be rushed to hospital for medical attention. First time I'd really been kind of faced with like a bit of a health crisis with someone I love. We remember a little while later being told we needed to see a specialist with her pregnancy, and even in the moments seeing everything on screen, the change in what was going on was changing on screen with the doctor who couldn't believe what was going on. And slowly, you know, as we're getting older and life is changing, so even our perception around physical health and some of the anxiety around that starts to change. Even then, as we progress, the first time we need to make the decision, do we rush our child who's sick to casualties, and some of the concerns as young parents trying to figure out what we do, and some of the anxiety and stress around the first time they had to spend a night in hospital, and needing to figure out all of those things. And you know, it's just as we've had kids and families, I don't know if you have a space in your house, maybe your kitchen, that kind of looks like this. Right? That's not mine. I took that from Steve's house when I was making, no, jokes. I owed you a joke. No, just like we've all got a space where over time we have, just because of our health, needed to get medication and see doctors and specialists, and we accumulate these kinds of things. You know, we don't need to talk about COVID and how that global health crisis brought every single one of us to a crisis point where we got confronted with our own health. Many of us were very sick. Many of us lost people we loved dearly due to a global health crisis. Many of us asked the question, forced us to this point, am I going to be okay? And at the root of all of our health concerns and our fears, and many of us are getting even older, and the older we get, the more we are aware of where our bodies are at and what is happening and how we're feeling. I mean, the world is consumed with this. We know how much money is spent. I mean, look at this article. This was a headline from Business Insight on the 1st of February. A couple of people were posting about this tech giant guy in America who's spending $2 million a year on trying to reverse his age. He's got nearly 30 doctors in his employment, monitoring everything. And over a couple of years of this level of investment, they're claiming he's reduced his body's age by about 5 years. So concerned and so consumed are we getting as a world around our health. And it is something that we are confronted with just because of the fragility of who we are as humans. And we know what happens with our bodies and this fear of, am I going to be okay? I don't know where you're at. I don't know where your family's at. I don't know what fears and concerns are in your heart right now. I don't know what you are enduring. Just because we're human, it might be that you are sitting right now with severe chronic pain, that you've had persistent health issues for a long time that you can't get over. It might be that things have changed and there's growing anxiety around yourself or someone in your family, your parents, as people age, that there is real anxiety around what you're going through, or as I said, pain going through, just the exhaustion of what you're enduring, the resources that you've needed to pour into your health. And so I'm trusting today that in this space, as what we have been trusting in this series, that you are going to encounter Jesus with where you are at in your physical health. We have been trusting that with all that we go through, it's not just preaching a sermon about how God heals. And we're going to be looking at that, but what's deeper and what are we trusting God for, and how when we encounter Him, He restores us. More than just hearing about a topic. And I'm trusting that as we go through this, you are going to as well take a step of trusting Him in a way that you never have, and maybe get restored in some of the things that you are enduring and going through and worried about and trusting Him for. With the passage that I'm going to read in a moment, just a disclaimer, you might go, Craig, that's weird that you're preaching around some of that stuff, and it's in the Bible, and so it's going to add some value to our lives, but just a disclaimer, it's not to be unsensitive to any of the issues around this, but just to give us some insight into what was going on and hear what God is going to say. So, Luke chapter 8. If you want to jump there and follow with me from verse 40, Luke chapter 8, verse 40. Otherwise, just follow along with me as we read this encounter that Jesus has with someone. Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed Him, for they were all expecting Him. Then a man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came, and he fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with Him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed Him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind Him, and she touched the edge of His cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped. "Who touched me?" Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me. I know, because power has gone out from me." When the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at His feet in the presence of all people, she told why she had touched Him and how she had been instantly healed. Then He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace." While Jesus was speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe and she'll be healed." When they arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go into the room with him except Peter, John, and James, and the father's child and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She's not dead, but asleep." And then Jesus goes on to heal her. And it's such an interesting passage. In fact, there is so much going on in this encounter that we're not going to be able to kind of hit every single potential rabbit hole or question that this passage raises. But the focus that I want us to bring our attention to is the woman who sneaked up on Jesus, who had been bleeding for 12 years. And so just to give you a bit of context for what was going on here. So she does this in a hidden, almost deceptive way, where Jesus is on this way. There is this crowd that's been expecting him, and now this Jairus, this prominent synagogue leader, please come and heal my daughter. They start moving on towards this healing, and this crowd is just crushing Jesus, as the text said. And here this woman, in her desperation, reaches out and touches him. And the reason that I think that she's so hidden, and we're going to unpack this in a moment, is because she's Jewish. This is in Israel. And because of her condition, she would have been what the Old Testament calls ceremonially unclean. Because of what she was going through, she would have had that as her label. What that means is when someone or something is unclean, it cannot go into the presence of God. It is not fit for worship. It has to go through a process to become clean again. Only then can a person who was unclean go through the process of being made clean, can then go and enter into the temple, can worship and be who God's people intended them to be. It was the whole of the Old Testament, particularly the book of Leviticus, deals with some of this. I'm just going to read with you what Leviticus says around some of what this lady would have been going through. So Leviticus 15 from verse 9, I'm just going to read it for us quickly, just to give you a bit of a window into this woman's life. When a woman has her regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days, and anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. See, even somebody who touches her would be unclean. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean. Anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches anything she sits on will be unclean. They must wash their clothes and bathe with water, and they will be unclean until evening. Whether it is the bed or anything she is sitting on, when anyone touches it, they will be unclean until evening. If a man has sexual relations with her and her monthly flow touches him, he will be unclean for 7 days. Any bed he lies on will be unclean. When a woman has a discharge of blood for many days at a time other than her monthly period, or has discharge that continues beyond her period, she will be unclean as long as she has discharge, just as in the days of her period. Now again, just to show you, for 12 years, anything she touches is unclean. Anyone who touches her is unclean. Anything she sits on that somebody else sits on is unclean. Now, the text doesn't say a lot about her, but there are some things that we can imagine and can maybe be implied about her because, again, it impacts your very ability to go and worship God and perform what is required of you as an Israelite in those days to go into the temple and offer sacrifices. She could not go in because she's unclean. No doctor could heal her. You just imagine your impact on your identity and what you are journeying with as a person. The reality is there might have been 12 years that no one has even touched her. Not a hand on her. People avoiding her because you don't go visit her. Because everything she's touched is unclean. Which means anything you touch in her house makes you unclean. Completely separated, isolated, just your whole identity, what's going on in your head and your heart, the implications of her condition for that length of time. Just imagine what she has carried in her soul for that period. That wasn't a joke, I'm sorry. she reaches out hidden. Understand what she is risking publicly by touching Jesus, because anything she touches is made unclean. And her desperation and her fear that she waits until Jesus is on his way to a healing, that the crowds are crushing him. Maybe I get away with it if I just touch the very bottom hem where he won't notice. Maybe I have a chance. And Jesus stops immediately. Someone has touched me. She can't hide anymore. And she has to come out into the light. She's immediately healed by Jesus. And we're going to go back to that in a bit. But just the story is amazing as we see what she was going on. And I can, in some small way, identify with this. And hopefully you can maybe see some of the connection and experiences in your own life. It was about when I was 26. Overnight, my body rejected certain foods. I went from being able to eat literally anything and everything I wanted, as most 26-year-olds do, and enjoyed food very much. It was literally the Saturday night and the Sunday, my whole kind of health changed in what I could and could not eat. And what unfolded was a few years of significant health issues for me, where we couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. And we had exhausted a number of doctors. In fact, as we were pursuing test after test, having scopes and stomach biopsies, living in Cape Town at the time, even got to see the top gastroenterologist for the Western Cape, who was the main lecturer at Tygerberg Medical Hospital, and just an incredible doctor who took on my case to try and figure out what was wrong with me. He even got like stomach lining samples and all sorts of things. And after exhausting all those tests with him, to have me meet with him in his office and to say, Craig, there is nothing wrong with you. I think this is psychosomatic and you maybe need to pursue some other course of treatments. So go, but doctor, you don't understand my life. At that stage, my body was so weak that when I was preaching, and at that stage I was preaching every Sunday, I had to preach sitting from a chair because I did not have the physical strength in my body to stand. And after nearly a year, exhausting every single option, going to even the best doctor that I could get to tell me, Craig, it's in your head, there's nothing wrong with you. And going, but I can tell you what every single day is like. How can you say that to me? And feeling really that maybe there is something wrong with me. And now let's compound this. I'm a Christian, right? I shouldn't be going through this stuff. And so I am part of a pastor's fraternal in the area that I live in, and as churches we get together on a regular basis. And so I share this, and my charismatic friends go, well, let's pray for you. We're going to lay hands on you. And I'm going, maybe this is the route I need to take. Okay, the doctors have exhausted everything, so all right, my charismatic friends who name it and claim it, and by faith I'm going to accept that I'm healed. And even going, right, Craig, in obedience, you need to now go out and eat all those things that have been really hurting your body as you in faith honor what God has done, and had to endure some serious pain. And they had them say to me, but Craig, you didn't have enough faith. It is your fault. My identity getting so messed up as I go to start praying and repenting of sin that I haven't even done, because maybe there is something that the Lord is punishing me for. Maybe it was some stuff that I did in my past, and now I'm just my penance for all the things I did wrong. And so now I'm really starting to think through, God, are you punishing me because I've prayed to be healed? I've had hands laid on me to be healed. I've walked in faith to try to claim my healing. and you're not healing me. So don't you love me? Was a thought that was going through my mind. Am I not good enough for you to heal me? Why must I endure such pain that's affecting my very calling? Because we kind of put some of that pressure on ourselves that I can't even stand to preach. I have to sit and endure that during what I'm supposed to do with my life. Like, am I not good enough? And these thoughts start to now warp what I believed about my very identity. And I started to realize some things, and started to kind of process my thinking a little bit differently. And I'm so grateful for the Lord, because I got to a place where I was like, I've done everything. There isn't another prayer I can pray. There isn't another thing I can repent of. And so I have no choice but to shift how I'm praying. Because I can't pray, God, heal me again. Like the way that is like destroying who I am as a person. And so now I'm going to say, Jesus, please sustain me. And so it got to when I needed energy to say, Jesus, you know what I've got to get through today. And I started to realize something. And this is really kind of the big thought that kind of started to impact me. And I started to believe a lie, that the pinnacle of the power of God in my life was a physical healing. That if that happened, that's the high water mark. You know, I'd heard testimonies. I'd read books about people being miraculously healed, and not doubting those, but believing that if that's what God did in me, then I'd hit it like the spiritual jackpots. But I needed so much more from Him. So much more than the physical healing was leaning into a God that could get me through anything. That when I could not stand, He got me to stand and get through things. And gave me energy to get through day after day after day after day as I learned to trust Him in all that I was going through in my health. She was healed. But then I read that Paul wasn't healed. And Paul prayed multiple times for healing. Was he any less of a child of God because he wasn't healed than this woman? And I realized, no. And what about then Stephen, who, as someone who dearly loved God and was so bold in the face of persecution, was stoned to death? And the trauma that the early church went through with persecution. And if you look at a spectrum of the work that God does throughout what we have in His Word, we see people are miraculously healed. And some people are not. But He always makes people holy. And He's always powerfully at work in all of their lives. Paul was shown things that nobody else saw about the nature of God and His kingdom. Yet he wasn't healed. He is not less. It's thinking Lazarus was raised from the dead, only to die again at some point in his life. Does that undermine the work that God did in his life? No. But realizing that, and now let's come back to this lady, because there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. She was unclean. Jesus, in every way, is perfectly clean. The only one able to take our sin. I said we can't go too deep into this, but in that moment, what is transferred from Him to her is His cleanness. She could not go and worship because of how she was sick. It meant she could not live out her God-given identity as a child of God, someone from Israel, and the way that she had to engage with God. Jesus took that away in His healing. And for the very first time in 12 years, she could go and worship and be in the presence of God because she was now clean. Jesus restores her identity as much as He restores her healing. And we can get confused, like I got confused, to think that what I need more than anything is to have my health restored. And I'm not diminishing that because I know many of us are going through significant health crisis that is affecting us in a very big way. But we can't lose sight of that it will only ever be temporary. Now, we're going to pray and trust God to heal us and those of us who need His healing today. But we have to frame it that there's always something greater than His healing, and that's His restoring of our identity in Him and our ability to be in His presence. And that will last off to all eternity for those of us who are in His kingdom and trust Him. So never have this idea in our minds that what I need more than anything is God to heal me and thinking I need this from God without going, what does God want for me? Which will always trump a physical healing. Does that mean we never pray for it? Of course not. Because what does God do? Jesus here, He has serious compassion for people when He heals them. Yeah, daughter, go in peace. You're healed. And then He goes on to heal another 12-year-old girl who had died. And whenever we see healing and God touching people in desperate need of Him, it's always the emotion of compassion that is given to it. It says Jesus had compassion on them. And that word compassion, we mention it from time to time because in that culture, it was often an emotion was attached to a part of your body. And compassion is attached to your stomach, your bowels. And you know that like guts, pain. That compassion, that Jesus was moved by compassion for people that were struggling. And that's why He healed like He did. It was in compassion for people. And so when we see His healing, we see what He did with this woman, it's important to know that we can trust Him. Why? Because He's gracious and compassionate. Does He always heal? The answer is no. I have yet to be healed, and I'm okay. Do I still pray for my food issues? Yes, because I haven't eaten a whole mango in nearly 15 years. Oh, but I can eat steak, and chocolate. I can still eat chocolate. But, there's things but the Lord has done some serious work in my life apart from that. Some serious work, like deep soul work, as I've learned to trust Him more than I ever have before. And so in many ways, I've journaled going, Jesus, don't take this away from me if it's going to mean I trust You less. And I wouldn't have felt His restoring hand in my life as much as I have if I didn't journey through the crisis that I did. Didn't take away the exhaustion and the money and some of the issues that I went through. But in my health, I felt His restoring hand. Not just on my physical body, but deep in my identity. Realizing that I don't need to be healed to be loved. In fact, He took this very thing to forge me even more into a son. To experience Him in such deeper ways. While all still trusting Him very deliberately for my physical health. And because I'm only going to get older, I don't have £2 million or dollars a year to try employ doctors to reduce my aging. That's not the point. But I'm going to be faced with more crisis in the future. And I'm going to need to trust Him in new ways as I and my family get older. But always realizing that every single day I can trust Him with the physical health of my family. That I can pray, Jesus, heal my wife, heal my children, heal me. While seeking some doctors who are so wise and trained and use what's available to me as I trust Him with my health. But at the deeper level going, you know what? Because my Jesus is on the throne. And because He's coming back and making all things new. As this physical body perishes and fades, when He returns, it's renewed. And so I can be restored and say, I'm going to be okay because of who He is. I am going to close my eyes at some point in this lifetime, unless Jesus comes back. Those are my only two options. And so no matter how much I pray, something will happen to this physical body because it will give up. And all the fear and the anxiety that goes around it, I have a God who is compassionate, who loves me, who created this body. And so I can trust him. And I do trust him, and I'm learning to trust him more as this is a dynamic thing that's ever changing. And so again, I don't know where you're at. I don't know the kind of pain physically, emotionally that you are journeying with. I don't know what you are afraid of with your health. I don't know what your concerns are and what's weighing on your soul. And so we're going to pray, and we're going to think, in a moment a song's going to play, and we're going to use that song as a time for you to think around your health with the Lord. And so while that's happening, I want you to pray and think through, like, God, what do I actually want? Maybe it's thinking through your fears and going, God, help me to be okay with what's happening physically with me. Maybe you've been thinking, I want this from God, and not realizing maybe he wants something more from me during this. And going, even if nothing changes, I'm going to be okay, and I can trust him, and my hope never wavers in him because there's always a greater thing that he's doing in me. And maybe it's going, you know what, I've actually held on to this for so long, and I've never trusted him with this. Maybe for the first time in your life, you're going to risk and say, actually, Jesus, I'm going to pray and ask for you to heal this. Maybe it's been your identity that's been hurt through this. Maybe you've carried shame and going, maybe God doesn't love me. Maybe you've had a thought in your mind, God's punishing me. And no, he loves you. And maybe use this time to start to think about that and actually go, Jesus, I'm sorry for thinking that you're a God who punishes me with my health. And so use this time to connect your thoughts on the Lord. And then when that's done, I'm going to close off for us. But let me just pray quickly first. Jesus, as we're going to go and focus our thoughts on you, Jesus, help us to be honest with how we're feeling, to be honest with our emotions, our anxiety, our fear, our concerns around our bodies, what's going on. And God, I pray that you would start to restore us in that. I especially want to pray for people who are battling with their very identity and their health, who have wondered about your love, have wondered about just your kingship in their lives, have felt that there's something wrong with them more than their physical health because of what's been going on. And Jesus, would you in this moment remind them that you love them, that their health issues has not been punishments, but nothing changes, that we're sons and daughters loved by you. Amen.